Well, hi there. Welcome to Benley Central. Now, you may remember I posted a video of going down to Benley Bob. By the way, I want to give him a name check because Benley Bob, he's the guy I go to for a lot of my bits, and he's the guy that sold me the frame and logbook and a lot of this bike. And then in another video, when we got back, I showed you the bits that I got from him and the bits I already had. Like I had the seat, I had the tank, I had the speedo, all that was kind of missing, but the basic engine, frame, wheels and logbook came from him. And I promised an update. Well, I've been very busy on other stuff actually, so this is all I've managed to get done. Now this is loosely assembled. This is the dry build, no fuel or oil in it or anything, and I always do this and I'll then stand back, squint my eyes a bit so it's a little bit blurred, just to get an impression of the basic outlines and the general look of it when it's going to be finished. And this is a very useful thing to do. So this is pretty lashed together and nothing's actually detailed and polished and all the rest of it. This is purely to get an overall view before I start nailing things down properly. So what have I done? Well, it's the standard frame, tank, handlebars, yoke, switch gear, light, all that kind of thing. You may notice this engine hasn't got a starter motor, which is a good thing. I want this as light as possible. Front mudguard, not sure at the moment. I've got this one lashed on at the moment, and I'm marking it. I always do this with masking tape, working out where that's going to be cut off. I do have a nice aftermarket rear light, so the next thing I'm going to do is chop the rear mudguard and bolt the light on to get the look of that. I like the standard little Honda 6-volt small one at the front, and this will be a 6-volter. And so this is it, loosely assembled. And I think generally, if you get the look of it, I think it won't have a centre stand, by the way. This is going to be as light as I can get it. I want this open here. We're not having side panels. I've got a carburettor for it. I'll sort of bolt that on loosely. But I think as a general view, you get the idea of what a little bobber like this is going to look like. Yes, it's tatty. Yes, it's rusty. But I think as an overall view, when I look at that and blur my vision, I think that's kind of what I'm aiming for. So I'll get it in the workshop and slowly the work will progress. Right, I've decided to fit the rear light to the Benley mudguard, and I've been waiting for weeks. I just haven't had time to chop this mudguard because it's been sticking out the back miles. So I'm going to plump for a line, this one here, and cut it off there, and then bolt it back on and just have a look. This is quite an exciting moment for me. Little things please little minds. Success. Always keep the off cut. For the time being, that'll do for a first attempt. I didn't like the first cut, but it is just rough. You always leave it slightly long, and I'm now going to cut it on the bike to try and get the radiuses near where I want them, just to put a bit of shape in this, because that looks awful. think that's better. Right, let me do this side. That's better. Hi there again, welcome back. I've been spending a couple of days since we were last filming, just continuing with my dry build to get my sighting lap. And I'm just going to run you through what I've done since we were last filming. Just basically, I've been doing the front end and putting the cables on because I had them lying around in a box. So I've got the clutch cable on, that's almost new, that feels lovely. I also went to the fasteners place and I bought nuts for the engine mounting bolts, so I actually managed to mount the clip that is the stay for the clutch cable. So I managed to get that on and get it all working, and that feels lovely. I don't know if the clutch is okay because obviously I haven't run the engine, but it feels nice. It feels about the right amount of resistance, so I'm happy with that. I've got the twist grip on with the throttle cable because I've actually bolted the carb on. This is a carb that I didn't get from Bentley Bob. It was in a load of bits I bought at an auction for a tenner. The slide in it was seized. I've unseized that. Look, that carb might be scrap, but I can get it on there to work out what I'm going to do with an air filter. And so that may work, it may not. I'll deal with that down the line, but it's on there and I can work out the air filter. I've mirror polished the switchgear housings. These were really crusty and disgusting. They look lovely. I've bolted on a set of handlebars I had lying around. They're a little bit too long. You can see there's about, I don't know, 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch sticking out. I'll chop that off. Same on the other side. And the main reason I've got to chop that is because if I put this on the end, the standard throttle cable and clutch cable and brake cable are right on their limit, and I think if I turn the bars fully, I think the revs would go up, and you need to always check that when you do a custom build, that when you put full lock on, the cables don't get pulled and get actuated. So that's all the right length. These are Honda 1100 mirrors off my 1100 I had lying around. They're brand new. To be honest, I don't really like them. They look a bit modern, but just for a dry build, they're fine. I managed to find the rubber gaiters for the levers, so they're on. So I think that's pretty tidy. I've routed the wiring from the switchgear in. None of it's connected. Some of it's loose. Some of it I've bundled in the headlamp where it'll be when it's connected up. The other job I did when I made this speedo mount, I put the brass bushes in. In fact, they're bronze, not brass. I put them in and it was slightly wonky, so I filed the holes and that's now straight with the handlebars, or parallel with the handlebars. So that's happy days. So I'm really quite happy with all that, and I like the look of it, and I have sat on it and it's really comfy riding position. So that's great. As I said, I've put the carburettor on. I have ordered an angled foam filter to go in here because I decided that it's got a cutout in the frame there for the original tube that goes to the airbox. That's normally there. But I don't want that with an air filter here. I'm going to try and get one straight on the back of the carb because it's simpler and I think it'll look nicer. And if the angled filter does work, it might not have enough clearance. This is why you do a dry build. That may or may not work. It was only £6.99 with free postage. So if it doesn't work, it'll be in a box for down the line. This is one, when I bought the carb for my other Bentley, this came with it. This one won't go in. So I've got a foam one that I think you can squash, and that might work its way around the frame. We'll see. It may or may not work. So that's kind of the front end and this side of it. Oh, I've put my roll mat on because I've chopped the rear mudguard, as you saw last time. I've bolted it on. I made a spacer for the rear light I had. So that's all on. And I was just working out, is that all okay? Or do I need to chop the frame rails? And I'm not going to chop them because if there's a bag on there or a roll mat, I think it looks fine. You know, this is, you know, a cheap build. but I want it to look beautiful, and I think that'll be fine, and I won't have to chop the frame. So something like that will be going on. It's very presumptive to put it on now. It's nowhere near running, but it gives me a sighting lap of what it'll look like when it is done. The other thing I did, I bought some nuts for the shocks because I've been wheeling it around and I got it outside for when we were filming it previously, and this shock had nearly come off there. So that's just for safety at the moment. It hasn't got the metal bushes in and it's all loose. But I can wheel it around without it collapsing on me. So those have gone on. It should be a domed nut, but that's just a 10mm metric fine thread, and that's on there. So come around this side, Harry. Round this side, again, dry build only. I was going to hide the battery up under here, get a really small sort of dry cell 6 volt, because this is going to be a 6 volt. And that's what I was going to do, because I want to look through this gap. But I thought this frame was a little bit unsightly, and I had an original 6 volt battery mount, and I thought I'll just bolt it on. It's only 2 bolts. And again, this proves the worth of doing a dry build. I think that'll look great, so I'm not going to hide the battery up under here. I'm going to leave it there because it hides this pressed steel frame, which I think is quite a good thing. This lug for the side panel mount can come off the top. That'll get chopped off, so that'll look simple. I'll put a leather strap round it, and I think that'll look cool. So there we go. You can see the bare bones of what I'm doing. I really like it. I think, you imagine it when it's painted and polished and everything, and these cases are mirror polished. I think that'll look lovely. Now, the one other thing you can notice, I've plonked on a pair of Sportster exhausts. These aren't going on here, but it gives me a sighting lap of roughly for the length, and I think these are too long. I want them to end about there, and I don't want these tapers. The main reason I don't want this style is because the Honda 250 has something very similar as standard, and I also want it to look slightly more old school. So I think I've found something that'll do the job. They're 16 inches long, which will bring it to about here when it's mounted on the headers. But again, this is just purely what's it going to look like with twin exhausts and roughly the length. So I think that's the bare bones of the dry build. And I've squint my eyes. I've got this Lapera seat that's also off a Sportster. I think that's lovely. When this is recovered with diamond stitching, black leather with whatever colour stitching to go with the paint job, I think we're getting there. Slightly older school mirrors, but I've just put them on for the look, and I think it's happy days. So that's that. It's time to move on. Now, with this dry build, I'm very happy with the rear mudguard and the mounts and leaving the frame alone with my roll mat on. I think that'll be fine. So now I've got to move on to the front mudguard. Now, there is a school of thought that I won't have a mudguard on there at all, but I do want to have one on the shelf in reserve in case, as you can hear now, I don't know if you can hear it on camera, it's pouring with rain outside, and I will need a mudguard if it's raining. So I've had this for ages. I got it with my other Bentley with the big fairing on. It was just a spare. The chrome is knackered on it. I don't even know if it's a Bentley one. I don't think it is. But I'm going to cut this because, as with a bobber, what do? You shorten the mudguards, in inverted commas, to save weight. It doesn't really actually make any difference, but it looks cooler as well. So I am going to chop this mudguard. Sean has been telling me not to, but I can't resist it. It's lying on the shelf. I've got a bit of time on my hands waiting for parts to arrive, so I'm going to tinker with this. So to cut this, I've propped it up with a bit of foam to get the spacing roughly right. I haven't drilled it yet. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce this mudguard down, and if it ends up scrap, well, I don't care. It's on the shelf anyway, and it might be all right. So I'll stick masking tape on, and then I've got a vague middle line. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's near enough for me to cut this. And I've just drawn in with a Sharpie, vaguely, where I think I'm going to cut it. And I'm going to reduce this mount down in width, because that's a bit too cumbersome. I've sort of drawn a line in there roughly right. It's not quite in the right place. It's kind of there. And I've drawn in roughly where I'm going to cut it. Now, if you look, there's other marks underneath that I've done previously. It might end up coming back to one of these, but always go too long, because it's easier to reduce it than have to add metal back, you know, weld on. So I'm going to cut it there. It'll probably come back to about there. actually at the end of the day. But I'm just going to try this, then I'll put it back on. I'm not worrying about the back at this stage. I'm just going to try and get the front of this mudguard right. So I've got my vague cut lines. Next, I'm going to cut it. Remember, it'll be hot, but there we go. Look, that's very rough, but I don't think that's a million miles out. So I'll just flap this by hand now and try and radius it a bit more evenly, but we'll get a good idea of what that's going to look like in a minute. Right, now I've put a flap disc on. I'm just going to tidy it up a bit. What I'll always do is I'll get a side that's perfect, and then I'll get a bit of card, draw around it, cut the card out and then stick it on the other side so that both sides are dead equal. But I'm not too fussed about that at this stage. I just want to have a rough look if it's vaguely the right line on the bike itself. So I'm just going to roughly equal it up. For a first cut, I think that's vaguely right. I can tell it's not exactly equal, but I'll make a card, I think, of this side and then draw around it, and then that'll get them both perfect. But now I'm going to take this tape off because it's very difficult to see exactly with all this tape on. And then I'll offer it up on the bike and see if we like the look of it or not. Right, here we go, the moment of truth. Remember, this is still all very rough at the moment, but when it's all finally fettled, oh, I need bits of foam in there to sit it up off the mudguard. Not off the mudguard, off the tyre. I think that needs to go up to about there somewhere. Get those in roughly right. That needs to go kind of there, I think. Stick this one in the back to prop it up. Stand back and have a look. Always get a bit of distance. I quite like that. I think that's not a million miles out. And it looks so much less bulky. I mean, look at the back where I haven't cut it. The front was in keeping with that. You can see how much lighter that looks. That'll really suit a little bobber. Right, I've now masked up the back. I have this longer to keep muck off the engine really, but I don't want it too long. So I've kind of settled for there at the moment. There's my cut lines. I'm going to the inner one here because when I had it on the bike and I eyed this one when it was on its own, I thought it wasn't quite enough. So I've set that. It's roughly the same both sides. I'll cut this and then we'll put it on and hopefully it'll look fantastic, and I'm kind of set in stone. I've just got to tidy up the curves so they're beautiful, but because they are a bit rough still. So let's see how it goes. Ooh. I'm going to cut this off completely rather than like the other side where I did that cut as well. I'm just going to chop the excess off to start with because I think it'll be easier to get the curve right. Right, that's that one. There's the excess. I'll keep that. You never know. It might be useful for bending a bit of alley down the line or something. I'll try and do this one as near as I can. There's a lesson. Where I've clamped that, the angle grinder was hitting the vise, and I could have forced it in there, but it's best not to. I'm just going to try and move this down a little bit. Let's just try that there. That's better. Look, I can get in there now. And there we go for that. It's not quite right there. I'll tidy it up on that bench in a minute just by hand. It's easier to see when you're directly above it like that. So now I've got to cut this one. Now if I get the tape off, I'll be able to see the actual chrome. This tape does start flapping and getting in the way. This corner needs a bit more off it, I can see. Well look, they say the proof of the pudding is in the eating. There it is on. I've got bits of foam under here because I haven't done the drilled the mounting holes because I might put a slightly wider front tyre and I just want to check it doesn't foul. So there's bits of foam under there just to space it from the tyre. I absolutely love that. I think the length at the back's about right, the flat with at the back with the radius on the corners and the tapered front. I haven't taken that much off it, but my God, doesn't that look different? I'm really, really happy with that. So now I've just got to wait for the post to arrive for my air filter and a few other bits. and then we'll crack on. So that's it for today, and thank you very much for watching.